Natural farming is a system of agriculture in which only the naturally available inputs are used. Today, I shall discuss how the crop plants are affected by sunlight and by the day length. The development of plants in sunlight and in shade are quite different from each other. I cite here the common example of a tree growing next to a house wall. Such a tree produces practically no flowers and fruits on the side facing the wall. All its flowers and fruits are borne on the side that is away from the wall. This shows that flowers are borne by a plant only on those parts that are exposed to direct sunlight. This fact has resulted in the recommendation to keep the crop rows oriented in the north south direction. If the rows are oriented in the east west direction, the plant receives direct sunlight either on the southern side or on the northern side, depending on the position of the sun. Such plants would produce flowers and fruits only on that side which faces the sun, similar to the tree planted next to the house wall. If the rows are oriented in the north south direction, the plants receive direct sunlight from the east in the morning, from the top around midday, and from the west in the afternoon. If there are too many plants in the field, leading to crowding of plants, they shade each other mutually. Therefore, there exists a desirable plant population density for each crop species. At the recommended population density, each plant is allowed some free space around it. Many textbooks on plant physiology describe this space as a zone of inhibition formed either by acidification of soil caused by hydrogen ions produced by the roots or by biocides exuded by the roots. However, during the early 1980s, I showed with appropriate experiments that the space between adjacent plants was necessary in order to avoid mutual shading by plants in a field. I can cite here the example of trees. Most trees develop large crowns which cast a dense shadow. Therefore, in the case of a mango plantation, the individual trees are planted at a distance of 10 meter by 10 meter in order to avoid mutual shading. But some plants have also developed strategies of avoiding mutual shading. Eucalyptus trees, for instance, can be planted at a spacing of 1 meter by 1 meter. This becomes possible because a eucalyptus tree does not form a crown, which is achieved by shedding the branches that are older than 3 years. The cereal crops can also be planted in dense stands. Many of them avoid mutual shading by having rather narrow leaves, but the important factor in the case of cereals is that they bear their flowers bunched together in a structure called panicle at the top of the plant. This point is always exposed to sunlight so that even under dense planting, each stem of a cereal plant always bears a panicle. However, maize offers an exception to this rule because it bears its cobs below the leaves. If maize is planted at a high population density, many stalks in the crop remain sterile without bearing a crop because the production site of the crop does not receive sunlight. I could induce crop formation on all stems in a densely planted maize crop by illuminating the plants from below by using fluorescent tubes placed on the ground. The scientific explanation of the effect of light and shade is that these factors affect the partitioning of the photosynthete into reproductive and vegetative development. If the last signal received by the plant before nightfall indicates that the plant is shaded by its neighbors, its reproductive development is suppressed and it utilizes the photosynthete in just growing tall in order to grow out of the shade. On the other hand, it produces flowers if the pre-nightfall signal indicates that the plant is not shaded. Providing information about the status of light or shade is mediated by a light absorbing pigment called phytochrome. It is a low energy reaction requiring only a few minutes of illumination. Because this reaction requires just a short exposure to light, legumes have made a very clever use of the end of the day signal. The dicot plants generally have broad leaves, so they shade each other more intensely than the grasses. Most dicot species are therefore planted at a wider spacing than the cereals, but legumes, in spite of being dicot plants, are grown very densely. The recommended seed rate of most leguminous crops is 100 kilograms per hectare, the same as that of wheat. The legumes bear the flowers and pods on nodes below the leaves. So, how do these nodes receive sunlight? My research on legumes revealed that by folding their leaves in the late afternoon, these plants allow the last rays of the sun to illuminate all the nodes on which the flowers and fruits are borne. Thus, although the plants are shading each other throughout the day, they deceive themselves with the false message at the end of the day that they are not shaded by their neighbors. Another effect of light is that the seeds of all uncultivated plants require exposure to sunlight before they can germinate. The seeds of the crop plants, on the other hand, can germinate in darkness even when covered by soil. Fukuoka, a Japanese advocate of natural farming, used to grow rice followed by wheat. When the rice was ready for harvest, he used to harvest only the top half of the rice plants and drill the seed of wheat between the rows of the stubble of the rice crop. The wheat seed germinated under these conditions, but the seeds of the weeds being shaded by the rice stubble could not. He would remove the rice stubble a fortnight later. The weeds would germinate after the shade of the rice stubble was removed, but the wheat crop, having germinated a fortnight before the weeds, grew so vigorously that it could successfully compete with the weeds. Photoperiod or day length is the next topic that I wish to deal with. Many of our local crop varieties, namely those of sorghum, cotton, sesame, and also many legumes, used to have a fairly long duration because they were short day plants. The seed was planted with the onset of monsoon, but throughout the rainy season, they would grow only vegetatively. They would start flowering in October when the days became shorter and they were ready for harvest in January. Today we see this characteristic only in the case of pigeon pea, that is arhar. The advantage of late maturity of these varieties was their relative freedom from pests. The insect pests have a very fast rate of multiplication during the monsoon season, but when the days become short, their caterpillars form cocoons which enter a phase of winter dormancy called diapause. There were no insecticides in the older times, and therefore the natural diapause of insects allowed these plants to develop their seeds and grains under pest free conditions.